Play. Here we go. Good afternoon, everybody. This is John Barrows. Make It Happen Monday. Hopefully you're all doing well. I have the privilege of having a fantastic guest on today, my good friend Sam Jacobs. Sam, say hi to the audience. Tell them what you're up to these days.
Hello, everybody. This is Sam Jacobs. I am reporting to you live from Austin, Texas. That is where this is happening. So what else can I tell you, John?
What are you doing? So we met back when you were at what, Alteryx?
Axial. And we met through, I was on a conference call with Doug Landis, he was at Box. And I said, who is the one person that we should hire to make our sales team stop sucking? And he said, you got to call John Barrows. And so that was how we met. And so you came in and you're filling the funnel session, and it blew everybody away. And everybody said it was the best single day of sales training they've ever received. And we've been fast friends ever since. And I think I brought you into live stream, and I brought you into the Muse as well.
Yeah, and so I appreciate all those. And, and this basically is a testament to everybody out there as far as champions, building champions, and playing the long ball game here as far as doing good work, because that shit matters, right?
Absolutely.
And now you're doing some really cool stuff. Explain to the audience what you're doing now, because I think this is going to dovetail into our conversations about the executive suite here. But talk to me a little bit about what you're working on these days.
I am, so for the first time, it's actually the second or third time, but I'm running my own thing. So last year, I spent a year as the chief revenue officer of a company called Behaveox. And meanwhile, I had started this membership organization called Revenue Collective. And Revenue Collective is basically an exclusive community for VP and above, chief revenue officer, chief marketing officer, VPs of sales, marketing, and operations. So basically commercial operators. It's a private community for those folks to come together, share best practices, find a new job, negotiate better for their job, and just improve and accelerate their career and hopefully make more money.
Love it. And we were talking before we jumped on here, and this was, I mean, I think I kind of knew this, but the stats are, them better than I do. It's almost like this, like a help group for C-level executives. Because you were saying, what's the average tenure of a C-level executive these days?
It's under 18 months. So Gong put out something about a year ago that said it was 19 months, and the latest research I've seen is that the average, now that's an average, right? So that includes in the average one of our new members who got fired before he even joined. So that affects the average. But it's under 18 months. And basically executives, and I'm talking about operating executives, right? There's a group of people that are, I think, super well supported. And those are the founders of companies. They've got YPO, Young Presidents Org, and they've got EO, and they've got VenWise, and they've got lots of places where they can go and get help from each other. And then, of course, there's investors, and they're famous, and everybody knows who they are. But the operating executives, the level below the CEO, I think has been underserved, and it's a pretty lonely position. And so that's why we created the group to help those people.
Yeah, it's as you talk about that, it was funny because my first real entree into startups, right, was a couple of buddies of mine from high school started Thrive Networks, right, and they were the three. So two of the three were friends of mine from high school, and they were the founders. And I came in, I was number 4, right? And they had started the company, they had taken the big risk, and they retained like 90% ownership of the business.
Absolutely.
Literally.
Of course they did.
Exactly. And look, I was a 25-year-old kid, and I remember I called up my uncle who was out in San Francisco. He's the only one I knew about like startups, right? That was for the weirdos out in the West Coast, not the East Coast. We didn't do that. And so I called up my uncle, and I was like, hey, I was working at Xerox at the time. And I was like, I got this opportunity to do a startup. What do you think? He's like, yeah, but get equity. Right? I'm like, oh, what's equity? I literally didn't even know what it was. And so he was like, well, at where you're coming in, you're not going to get much. Ask for 2, expect 1%, right? And so I was like, okay. Right? So that's exactly what I did. I got my 1%. And then I went my merry way. And what happened was like literally, probably after the first 2 or 3 years, after that, it was me and the other directors that legit put the company on our backs and took this thing to get it sold to Staples. And I remember vividly, like we all could kind of sense it, that when we knew we were going to go for a buyout, and we knew it was going to be so bittersweet. Because the founders who had really started it, like they were still involved in that type of stuff, but we were doing the massive heavy lifting, and we were going to get a fraction of what they got. And so we were going to be pissed because we didn't have the support. We didn't have any coaching. We didn't have the YEO stuff. And so I can feel the need for this pretty big. So let's talk about why. Why is the average, why is it going from 19 to 18 to 17 right now?
Here's my opinion, and walk with me on this journey. So if you look at, the short answer is there's too much money and not enough good companies. But the longer answer is that if you look at stock market returns over the last 30 years, yes, since like 2008, 2009, 2010, since the crash, yes, the market is up big. But if you look at equity returns over a longer time period, the reality is that the stock market actually hasn't performed that well. It really depends on when you pick, when you pick the beginning moment. So what does that mean? That at the same time, technology links the world and capital is truly global. And so you've got all of these people with all of this money and they're looking for returns. And the only way you can get returns is if you take on risk. And they're looking at the equity markets and they're saying traditional stock market returns are not sufficient for what I'm trying to do. And so they want to say, where can I go to get 30, 40, 50% returns? Well, the answer to that is, of course, early stage companies. So all of this money floods into VCs. And that's why, when you look at the SoftBank Vision Fund and, you're asking why is the Saudi money in there? And, where does all this money come from? Where's the China money? That's because all of these sovereign wealth funds and all of these, these institutions and these entities have billions and billions of dollars of capital, and they're trying to figure out where to put it. And the only place they can go to put it is early stage companies. So all of a sudden, you've got Andreessen and you've got, Sequoia, you've got these VCs that are raising massive funds. And you've got, and just being a VC is like the sexy job, right? Fred Wilson started blogging about it 20 years ago, and now he's famous, and Mark Andreessen's famous, and Ben Horowitz is famous. And so all of this money floods into VCs. Their business model is pretty simple, right? Their business model is place 10 bets, have 1 or 2 of them return the fund, have 5 or 6 of them not do very much, but stick around as companies. They call them zombie companies because they don't go out of business and they don't sell, and then have the rest fail. So their business model is pretty simple, which is place a shitload of bets and then figure out who, and the consequence of those bets is that you're supposed to take that money and put the fucking pedal to the metal, pardon my French. Yep. And so you are supposed to, they do not want a company to fail or not achieve an opportunity because it didn't try hard enough, right? They want everybody to leave everything they have out on the field, which means burning shitloads of capital. And then from there, they will figure out who wins and who loses. They never want you to fail because you didn't try hard enough, you didn't spend enough money. That's why every board meeting, the VC says, thanks for that plan, Sam. That's fantastic. Now, what would it take? What would you need from us to add $5 million in new business to that forecast? Dude, I don't know.
Let's take a check for $5 million, please. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. I'll put it in my personal account and I'll come back to you with another great PowerPoint. So the bottom line is that their incentives are not quite aligned with the natural growth rate of most companies. Josh Koppelman at First Round says, I sell jet fuel. Not every company needs jet fuel. How does that relate to the original question that you asked of the 18 months? What it means is that all of these early stage founders have a tremendous amount of money and a tremendous amount of pressure. And they are trying to push growth as quickly as they can. And they're reading all the blog posts. And the reason that they're trying to push growth and the reason they have so much money is because of the forces that I talked about earlier. And they don't feel like they have any time to evaluate these decisions. And so they feel immediate pressure to deliver, and they place that pressure back onto the revenue leaders and the commercial operators that they hire. And so you get in there and, they say, oh, we're going to give you the right amount of time. I mean, most of the time, they spend longer interviewing you than and screening you and recruiting you than you actually end up working at the company. Certainly that was the case for me at the Muse, where I got to know those founders very, very well over many, many months, and then ended up only working there for 9 months. So that's kind of a little bit of the context, which is there's just a tremendous amount of pressure based on the amount of money that's in the system. And that pressure is finding itself into the executives. And the other thing, I think, just another random comment, is that, investors, I think their biggest fear, or a very big fear that they have on behalf of their founders, is that they are soft and that they're not going to fire aggressively enough. And so almost from the moment, and you can read this, in the blogs, even like the famous bloggers, the famous thought leaders that are ostensibly on the side of the salespeople, like a Jason Lemkin, they're always talking about when you should fire your VP of sales. And they're always saying, is she the 0 to 10 woman, or is she the 10 to 30 woman? Oh, we need the 10 to 30 woman because, the woman that got us to 0 to 10, she's not really good at scaling past this stage. Mm-hmm. Now, if you talk to a lot of folks, or at least, I helped take a company, GLG, from 25 million when I joined to 300 million when I left. Now, I helped. It wasn't just me. Mm-hmm. But what's the point? The point is I wasn't like smarter back then, and I didn't have scale experience. What I had crack cocaine, and I was selling it to crackheads, which I was selling access to very valuable information to hedge funds. Mm-hmm. And when you have a great product, a lot, that papers over a lot of the inexperience. So long story short is that they are telling founders, get over your fear of being liked and you got to make the tough calls. And the tough calls are that, you fire people when it's not working out or when they're not right for the right stage. And so I think that is also a contributing factor. And the consequence of it is that, we're in an era where it's pretty dangerous actually to be a commercial executive. Mm-hmm. Because, our equity is given on, and I can get off the soapbox, you can ask me a different question, but the equity is given on a 4-year vest, 1-year cliff, right? And it's common equity. And if your listeners out there, aren't diving deep, and this is part of what we're going to talk about on my podcast, the Sales Hacker podcast as well, but the common equity sits at the very, very bottom of the stack, right? Yes. Everybody gets their money out before the common equity. And the founders typically have founder shares or some kind of preferred equity. The investors have liquidation preferences. So we're there. We join these startups. We didn't go to work at Salesforce. We went to work at this early stage company because, we want to get rich. Partially. I mean, we want to have an impact, mm-hmm. of course, and we want to love what we do, but we want that lottery ticket. And the reality is how the lottery ticket plays out most of the time does not work out the way that we think it will. You create a tremendous amount of value and then you leave the company. I don't know if you all have seen the tax bill that comes along with exercising your equity, but they treat the difference between the strike price and the most recent valuation as income. And so you pay income tax on an unrealized gain. Just the reality of the current environment is that it's a volatile, dangerous situation for commercial operators. And that's why we started the group. And that's one of the reasons that I do what I do, which is to help these people out. So that's my situation.
There's a lot to unpack there because
I know.
Well, no, because sorry, I get my head spinning because there's so many examples that I have of that. I think the big falsity of startups, if you will, is thinking that you're going to get rich, thinking you're going to get that FU money, right? And really, the only people who ever really get rich in startups are the founders. Period. Yeah. Right. And I learned that, the hard way, like I said, but then I also learned that with equity, my level of education on equity and options and all that is so minimal. And I remember there was a couple of startups that I had helped, right? Because I was using their technology or whatever it is. And I'd put it in my slide deck and all of a sudden it was like pop, 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 pop. I was 50% of the revenues for some of these small tech companies, right? Early stage. And they would call me and they say, look, we can't pay you for this, but thank you. Do you want shares? Shit, yeah, shares. That's fantastic. And then they would sell and I'd be like, ding, ding, ding. Yay. Where's my money? And they'd be like, yeah, sorry. We think you owe us money actually. And I'm like, whoa. I thought I had like 100 shares or 1,000 or a percentage of this. And they're like, yeah, sorry, John, you're, common stock basically. So eat shit. I'm like, oh, thanks. So I've basically now anybody who offers me shares of their startup, I'm basically like, fuck you. Pay me.
Or I'll take the shares, but I will also take $2,000 a month to put me in my slide deck and go fuck yourself.
Exactly. So that's just cautionary tale for anybody out there that thinks that shares are awesome when a company gives them to you. Go talk to somebody like Sam who knows what the hell they're talking about so that you can at least understand what the expectation should be. One of the things you said there, is there something, so she is a 0 to 10 million, she is a 10 to 50 million, right? You mentioned that earlier. I believe that there is eventually, as you get to a point where you are in your career, after you learn and all this other stuff, that there is a place where you fit better. 0 to 10, 10 to 50, 50 to IPO, that type of thing. Do you agree? And second of all, How do you figure that out along the way without just making a bunch of failures and getting fired a bunch of times? Like, should people be looking at that a little bit more to say where, because I'll give you an example, and you probably know, like Brian Remington, right? Do you know Brian Remington?
I don't know Brian Remington.
Brian's he's a good friend of mine. He's an SDR leader, okay? He's over at Tanium now, and what he's doing is, I'm sorry, OneLogic. He's over at OneLogic, and he builds SDR teams, right? He comes in at a certain stage of a business when they're really starting to expand and they need to really build up, and he's like 3 years in, 2 to 3 years, he crushes it, and then they go past where, you know, he gets, you know, then it's kind of not interesting anymore, and then he does another one. So should people look at their careers like that as they grow? When should you start to understand that? Is that a thing? Can we explore that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So the short answer, or my belief is, I think there's it's sort of, it's like a gray picture, right? Yes, there are different stages where people fit better. I think that the compensation around that is not set up the right way, to your point, right? Which is that everybody's paid the same way, which is you're given equity over the vesting period that I mentioned. And oftentimes if you leave too early, there's a bunch of factors that happen between when you created significant enterprise value and when that enterprise value is realized. Now, putting the money aside, are there benefits to being focused on a certain stage? I think there are, but again, all the money is made at the end. You know, like all of the money is made at the acquisition or at the IPO. So and frankly, maybe I'm one of those people. Maybe I'm like really, really good at the beginning of just like harnessing raw chaos and turning it into something that can turn into something. But that doesn't mean I'm great at managing like a 2,000 person global org with, 15 different mechanisms for generating revenue. But, if I were to pigeonhole myself, but the incentives are not aligned for me to describe myself that way, because it's hard to make the money it's hard to be compensated and to generate the right amount of return for the value that you create at that stage. You can create massive value. If you take a company from, $1 million or 2 million ARR to 10 million ARR, and you're getting 12 times multiples on revenue for enterprise valuation, basically saying if you do it quickly enough, 10 million ARR can be $100 million, if not more, in enterprise value. And, 1 or 2 is obviously like maybe 10 million. And so you've created $90 million in value for the shareholders, but you leave, they raise money at that $100 million round. The people that come in with the money have liquidation preferences or kind of any kind of preferences, so that the company sells for 200 million, exactly to your point. You're like, oh shit, I have my options that, valued at 10 million. The delta between it's 200 minus 10 is $190 million gain times my percent of the company. It's like, well, not really, because they structured it in such a way that the investors got all of their money out first. And now there's only, $10 million left pro rata for everybody else, which is, I don't mean to, always bring money into the situation or how you're paid, but your expertise has to align with that compensation, which is why I think, a lot of the structures around, frankly, how work works is changing. I think, to the point of your buddy who's an SDR manager, an SDR builder, I think that is an incredibly valuable skill. And for him to want to do that over and over, there needs to be a structure that pays him that compensates him appropriately. Because otherwise he's just coming in and building and leaving, and then, and then it doesn't work. Yeah. I mean, I think there's consulting frameworks. There's different kinds of ways of, if you want to focus on that scale and that stage. But again, the reason that people are averse to saying, oh, I'm an early stage person, is because the money's made at the end, and you're worried that you're going to be pigeonholed into something where you do all of this work and don't see any of the return from it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of sad because I watch it. I use the marketing person as the perfect quintessential piece of this. Or no, I'm sorry, the enablement person, which is, enablement's finally starting to be. It's not enablement. It's now whatever. Landis hates calling it enablement. I forget what he calls it now. It's like
oh, he hates that word. I talked to him about that.
Yeah, literally, anytime you say enablement,
about
the conversation. Shut the fuck up! It's not enablement. But whatever he calls it, that's finally a department that people are looking at as a strategic part of the initiative. But what happens inevitably is companies they grow crazy, right? And then they're like, oh shit, we need somebody to kind of control like onboarding and doing some training. So, hey, Sally, you want to come over and do this, right? And they take somebody who might have been in sales or something like that, who looks at themselves as a better teacher than anything else. They come in, they beat them over the head. They tell them that they got to build while running on this rocket ship, give them very limited budget. And then they get to a certain point where they're like, and that usually lasts about 1.5 to 2 years. They literally beat the shit out of this poor person with no resources. Then they get to a point where like, you know what, we need somebody who kind of knows what they're talking about here. So we're going to go hire a VP who's been there, done that, and they're going to be your boss. And then basically that's firing that person, right? I don't know about you, but I always tell people, if you're a VP of something and all of a sudden your company hires an SVP of whatever that is, that's a company basically saying, fuck you, you're fired, without firing you. Right? That's what happened to me.
That is exactly right. And that happens all the time. And I think, back to the point of your question about like, are there people for stages? I think that the thing that people underestimate, I think some people are getting religion about this now, but the thing people are underestimating is the institutional knowledge, the value of having come up through the company and understanding where the bodies are buried, understanding the product really in depth, and understanding the culture of how to get shit done in an organization. And that is why, I think Travis Bryant, who is, who used to be SVP of sales at Optimizely, and he was there from like the first sales hire. Chris Degnan at Snowflake Computing is like chief revenue officer. He was the first sales hire. I really, really love companies where the founders can tell, because it's not the founders. I think it's more the investors. The investors are like, I have this muscle memory, and, I need the person that to me feels, it's like, it's like baseball pre-Moneyball. I need the look and feel. I need this person that looks like a sales leader, because that makes me comfortable when I want to take this company public. And those people don't work out that often. That's part of that 18-month turnover, which is you bring this person that doesn't really understand the organization, the product, the technology. And I've found a lot more success in just believing in the people. Take those people that you think have massive potential and just keep investing in them. Surround them with resources like you, right? Give them the sales training budget, give them the enablement budget, give them the peer-to-peer mentoring budget, and get the most out of those people. And you can go so much further than constantly thinking that, some new chief level, whatever. The hilarious thing is when they hire the C-level person who works remotely. Is that not just like fucking what? What? They're like, we're based in Pittsburgh or wherever city. Yeah. We hired our new CMO. She's based in San Francisco. I'm like, okay, how the fuck is that going to work?
Exactly. And I mean, to your point, I think culture really makes a difference. I just look at it from it's very rare that I've seen kind of like the baller, whatever, come into a situation and make it that much better. I've seen the baller come in and blow the whole thing up and burn it to the ground way more often. Right. I mean, even me, I'll go back to Thrive. I was a 25-year-old kid. Right. So I was grinding, and I was the quote unquote VP of sales, which was a joke. Right. This is why titles are a joke. And I actually proactively went to my founders and I said, look, guys, I know we want to grow faster. I'm doing everything I can with what I know here. I got to be honest, though, I don't know what I don't know at this point. So if you guys wanted to go hire an SVP of sales that I could learn from, I'd be open for it, right? So what they did was they went to our number one competitor, and who was growing crazy, and they hired their VP of sales from them. And the guy came over, and when I tell you he couldn't have been a worse culture fit, I mean, it was appalling. The first thing he walks in the door and says is, all right, we're all wearing suits and ties to every meeting that we're going on to. Like, that's the first thing. I'm like, dude, fuck, really? We sell outsourced IT services in the SMB market. I'm going into.
They met John Barrows. He's
like, right? And I'm like, no, right? And so, and all he did was he brought his list of all their customers, because that was his value in his mind. He sat behind a desk and told everybody what to do, and it was a fucking disaster. Now, thankfully, I didn't quit, and we fired him, and then I ended up taking over and taking it to that next level. But then the same thing happened to me when I got at Staples. I was like, when we got acquired by Staples, I was like, oh, cool, new interesting thing. And then they fired me because they weren't giving me the resources. They weren't giving me anything. And we got to hire somebody who's kind of learned how to scale a global team. And I'm like, you got to give me a chance here first, right? But I think their mentality was, I didn't look the role. I didn't fit the role of what they were expecting from a global, sales leader type of thing.
Yeah, and the flip side is just as dangerous, which is they spend all this time recruiting, this famous, this savior, and then what happens is you join the company and you start making changes, and from this guy's perspective, like, you can't close a deal without a suit and tie. I don't know what he believes,
Yeah.
but whatever it was that he believes, and they've got to, at that point, the founder's got to stand behind that person.
Yep.
And that's the other thing that happens, because they get nervous and they get insecure about this decision. They're like, wait a minute, was this a huge fucking mistake? And all of a sudden, the junior people that have the ear of the founder, that are, in the modern era, everybody has this feeling of entitlement to have a meeting with the CEO, which is fine.
Sure.
So they start bitching about it. They hired this guy, Sam. He doesn't know what he's doing. He wants to make us come in at 9. And I have my yoga class at 9 and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And like, the point is, the minute that you start entertaining those conversations, you are undermining this person that you just paid all this money to. You just paid all this money to some recruiter. And so it's like, if you're going to make this hire, if you're going to make this decision, that's why it's a big deal, right? That's why you should consider it, because you've got to stand behind them. It's a 2-year, 3-year journey. You can't bring them in after spending 6 months recruiting them, give them 2 months, watch everybody start complaining. Well, of course they're going to start complaining. They're going to do it differently. That's the point. That's why you hired some new person. So at any rate.
I got a couple questions.
Yeah.
One is macro, others micro. Macro is, do you see this getting worse, or do you see that there's eventually going to be a breaking point where people realize there's got to be a better way? And I preface it with this, which really depressed me a little while ago. And I don't want to talk politics, but this one very specific thing. I remember Hillary, when she was going for the presidency, right? She was interviewed, and she was quoting this study that was done of the top 50 CEOs, okay? The top 50 CEOs in the world, of the top 50 companies. And they were asked, if you could do something today that benefited your company, the environment, your employees, and everything, but you couldn't realize it until 5 years out. If you could do something today that 5 years out you knew was going to be a huge benefit to the world, including your employees, but it meant 1 penny off of your stock price today, would you do it? And 50 out of 50 of them said no. Wow. Because what their point was if I did that, if I did something that negatively affected our stock price today, I wouldn't get to 5 years. So that's why. And I'm just, and I look at companies that I work with and you've worked with, it's monthly numbers. We got to hit them, which drives such bad behavior. I personally feel like we're in a little bit of a transition phase here, where Gen Xers like you and I, we grew up as a numbers game. Like, that was it. Give me my territory, get the fuck out of my way, make 100 dials and go, right? And so everybody understands now that quality is the answer, right? Account-based marketing, account-based selling, the personalization at scale, blah, blah, blah. But yet we're still the quote unquote leaders right now. And so it's hard to coach on quality. It's easy to manage towards numbers, right? Make your $50. You didn't hit them, you're fired, right? I hope we're in a transition phase that even though, like, our brains are kind of caught in 2 directions, right? We're like, oh, we know quality, but fuck it, we got to go hit the numbers, right? Are we moving towards a breaking point, or do you see this just getting worse as far as the pressure to drive results?
I do think it's changing, actually, exactly to your point, because listen, there's a lot of information out there now, right? Would it have changed so quickly if, every person that hears this podcast is probably going to think a little differently about their equity than they did yesterday. Okay. So, but definitionally, and I think, again, I'm not trying to talk my book, but the reason that I do Revenue Collective is we represent, I have this blog post in my head, like Newtonian physics and like the startup ecosystem, which is, one of Newton's laws is for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And Revenue Collective is essentially an equal and opposite reaction to this dynamic. What are we trying to do with this group of people that we hope to build a global movement, and the global movement is about recalibrating the risk-reward relationship between founders, investors, and then all of the people that work at the companies. And, like whatever is industry standard today might very well change. I'll give you a specific example. So we have this concept in Revenue Collective around the Bill of Rights, which is like, these are the 5 pillars that C-level executives should negotiate for when they go into a company. They are the right to due diligence, the right to aligned comp, the right to liquidity, the right to severance, and the right to consult. And so let's pick one of those, which is the right to severance. So my belief, right, and this is going to, cause certain founders to tell me to go fuck myself, as they this, other like on the elliptical or whatever.
Board, my friend.
Yeah, exactly. So I apologize in advance. But like a Series B or later company, right, which has just raised, $20-30 million, I believe that any operating executive that you hire should get 12 months severance. 12 months of their base pay paid in one lump sum upon any kind of termination or early departure. And if it's Series B or earlier, it should be 6 months. Now, I also happen to know, of course, because I have a network of people that we share information, that market is 3 months, right? And if you go into a negotiation, and frankly, most people don't even offer it at first, you have to ask for it. Mm-hmm. So what's going to happen if we get our way? And, all of these C-level executives start saying, fuck you, I want 12 months severance. Well, I'll tell you what's going to happen. The founders are going to think long and hard before making that hire. Well, good. So right. On the margin, will it mean that like there's an equalizing force where maybe a few people don't get that VP of sales or that CRO job or CMO job because they negotiated, because the companies are saying, you know what, if it's going to be this expensive to hire this person, let's see how far we can go with consultants. Let's see how far we can go with some advisors. Let's see if we can take this 25-year-old rock star, SDR manager and turn her into the VP of sales. But I think that's the right approach. I don't, when I was consulting, and I still do some consulting, and the number one type of client that I got was a startup that had just fired their VP of sales and needed an interim sales leader while they searched for their next VP of sales. Mm-hmm. And in one of those cases, the person had moved his family, including his kids, from LA, where he was kicking ass at a fast-growing company, but had one specific playbook and one specific sales motion. He picks everybody up and he moves them to New York for this great new job, and he lasted 6 months and then is out on the street on his ass. And I can tell you that he didn't get 12 months severance because he probably didn't know to ask for it. I doubt that he got 6 months. I bet that the rationale was, listen, he's only been here for a couple of months, and I'm really sorry, but here's 8 weeks. And I think that's very generous because normally our policy is X. Mm-hmm. And so, this is a long answer to your question, but the point is, I do think that there will be a rebalancing. I think that the consequence of all of this will be more education for founders and executives on what type of capital is really the right capital for their business. Because the other thing people don't understand is there's a lot of flavors of money besides just venture capital. Right? Mm-hmm. There's lots of people that don't expect 40% annualized returns. And there's lots of ways to fund a business, including to the point of your business and my business, John, which is getting your customers to fund your business. Hey. The old way.
Sell, right?
So, yeah. Delivering something that's super valuable and getting people to pay for it. Like, hello. So I do think it'll change. I do think it's in the middle of changing. And, but I think, all of us represent that change. We represent like the new information that we're bringing to the market.
So let's finish up with some stuff for the sales reps out there trying to help those executives. Okay. Because I think and I'm going to put myself in this bucket as an inexperienced sales rep. Earlier in my career, whenever I saw, and this is like, when LinkedIn first came out with the job movements, hey, so-and-so going from this company to that company, right? That was like, oh, great. Hey, Sam, what's up? I see you're the CRO of XYZ company and I want to help you. This is what we do, right? And rarely successful. So what I tell reps is, look, when you see somebody go into a new executive role, there's two things that an executive has to figure out immediately when they come on board. And correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but one is they got to, yes, they did their due diligence on the business, but now once they're behind the curtains, they got to really now see what the hell they're working with, right? So they got to get a lay of the land pretty quick as far as where are the holes, where are the gaps, SWOT, whatever you want to call it, that type of thing. And then as soon as they really get their hands around what the fuck is going on, then they have to make an impact almost immediately, right? Because we're no longer in the world where you can enact a 5-year plan and hopefully it comes through. Like I hired you to drive results immediately. And if I don't see those results in 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, I'm cutting your head off, right? So I tell reps, look, if you can help an executive either figure out what they're going, what they have really fast, or make an impact really fast, those are the only two times that you should actually say, I want to talk to you as a new executive. Otherwise, just send them an email saying, congratulations, Let me know if the dust settles. Here's some information type of scenario, right? So that's kind of a dummy way of looking at it. But is it even feasible to talk to a new leader? Because most of them bring in their like, you know, I'm the benefactor of it. You've gone from company to company, and I'm a known commodity for you, right? So you know exactly what I do. So some other trainer calling you and saying, hey, Sam, what's up? I see you just landed at X. You know, I'd love to talk to you about my sales training needs. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you know what? Devil I know, better the devil I don't. So what chance do we have as sales reps in engaging with new leaders and helping them succeed? And what approach should those reps take so that they don't sound like the douchebag sales rep that just says, hey, congrats on the new job, I want to sell you something?
Well, I think it's a great question. And I think so, I mean, this is general sales advice that every person is giving in every context these days, which is do not send. First of all, you know, I just spoke to Keenan, and he's focused on problem-centric versus product-centric. And like, you just got to get the predictable revenue style, like cadence or sequence, you know, out of your arsenal that is just telling me about your features. And like the gobbledygook jargon that I don't even know what the fuck they're saying half the time from SDRs and from account executives, that doesn't resonate. The second thing that doesn't resonate for me personally, but again, it depends on the buyer. I really don't care if you went to UVA where I went to undergrad, you know, like go Who's. Like, that doesn't help. You know, I'm trying to hit a number. And so it's just wild that all you have to do, first of all, please cold call, because, you know, I understand that I pick up the phone, especially with local presence. I pick it up more often than I should because I'm just like, who the fuck is this? So if you can help me hit my number, I'll take a conversation with you. The other thing I would say is exactly to your point about like the point of the turnover, the point of the 18-month thing is like, don't worry, you know, you play a longer game than just trying to get me to buy right here, right now. Mm-hmm. And if you can build a deep relationship with me, and over time, if you can convince me that, you know, Chorus is better than Gong, or, you know, Pipe Drive is better than Salesforce, mm-hmm. It may not be feasible for me to rip something out right now in this particular organization, but if you can build a relationship with me, I can take that to the next organization where I have a different opportunity. But the thing I would say, and the advice I'd give is the same advice I give any salesperson selling to anybody, which is bring empathy and curiosity and speak to me in English. And you have to understand, if I'm a new CRO or CMO, it's very simple. Why did they hire me? They hired me to hit some number. They hired me because for some reason they wanted to up level, or they weren't satisfied with their performance. And there's a tremendous amount of pressure, exactly as you said, to deliver quickly. So if you tell me, hey, I can get you leads, I can help you build pipeline, let me tell you how. I don't need the gobbledygook. I don't need like the 50 different things that your product marketing person wrote. I'll take a call based on that. And by the way, I don't need a demo. Like I don't need to see the thing. Walk me through the business case for how your solution is going to help me make more money, and I will take that conversation.
Is there just for, again, probably the less experienced reps out there, is there kind of a general 30, 60, 90 that executives go through? Because I remember when Jack Welch, like I actually had the pleasure of and privilege of working for Jack Welch for a couple of months to get his online program up, awesome. Which was insane. And what Susie asked me was, hey, like his wife, she said, you know, give me your 30, 60, 90. And I have a pretty standard 30, 60, 90. First month is all about learning the business. Second month is figuring out what systems. Third month is putting those systems and executing, right? General. Yeah. Like, is there a, because I'll give you another thing, like mergers and acquisitions is a trigger, like reps use mergers and acquisitions. And I say, okay, yes, but understand the life cycle of a merger and acquisition, right? There's everything that happens up until that merger and acquisition, like the announcement, right, that you don't know about. Then there's the announcement. And really when that announcement happens, nothing's happening internally as a business. That's a pure PR thing. And then there's about 6 months out where they start to look at the systems and try to figure out where there's overlap. And then they're about a year out is when they start to really make the changes, right? So if you can time like I actually avoid the initial, hey, I saw you merged with, I want to talk, right? Because that's when every rep goes. I usually wait till 3, 6, 12 months out, and I speak the language of where they are in that acquisition, right? So is there a language that if a rep saw hey, this person just got hired, right? 30 days in, this is what they're focused on. 60 days in, this is what there's 90 days. Is there kind of a standard that you would suggest that reps think about as it relates to that?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I would suggest there's a standard that that new C-level executives think about, because most of them don't know how to do it either. But first of all, there's a book called The First 90 Days, and that's like the template. Every exec reads that or will get recommended that book as soon as they start a new job. And the point of that book is look for a few quick wins. But what I tell everybody in your first 30, and I also think 30, 60, 90 is like a kind of a, I really think it should be like 30, 90, 180, because like that's, but you're right that everybody else is saying 30, 60, 90. The first thing that you're doing in the first 30 days is you're meeting the team and you're meeting the customers. And most people they skew towards meeting the team and they don't spend enough time with customers. And the way you always get nailed in the first board meeting is if you go into that board meeting and you haven't ever talked to you don't have a point of view on the business itself. You have a point of view on like which of your reps are really good, but you haven't talked to Disney or Pixar or whomever the big customer is of your business. So the first 30 days are typically spent listening. And that's just something for a rep to know. Like, I'm sure you're out there meeting with your customers and gathering feedback, and we help with this or we help with that or blah, blah, blah. But, and then the 60 and the 90 is beginning to make changes and beginning to look for quick wins, medium wins, and long-term wins. And quick wins might be like, hey, the comp plan's capped, let's uncap it. Or it might be, we don't have any SDRs, we're going to build an SDR team. That's probably a medium term. But that's something to know, that like the first part of your experience as an executive is just ingesting information. And the information is about the company and how it functions, the team that you're responsible for, and then your customers and what they think of the product.
Awesome. Very cool. And you mentioned that book. What was that book again? The First 90 Days? First
90 Days, yeah.
It's
a great book.
I got to throw that on my list. Are there any other books that you would recommend a sales rep read to understand the mindset of an executive, so that they could maybe have, because I always say, like, read the books executive. If you want to have conversations with executives, read the books executives read, right? They're like, what are your like top 2 or 3 that you would say, hey, if you're a sales rep and you want to connect with said executive in that mindset, you should probably read this book, because they're all reading that book?
That is a great question. Everybody's reading Shoe Dog right now about Phil Knight, the history of Nike. Yeah. So, there's I don't know if this is that helpful, but a few of them, this guy Pat Lencioni, he wrote this book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He just wrote this book, The Advantage. That's a book that a lot of people are reading. I mean, a lot of people are reading the classic text by like Michael Porter. I think, here's a random book, but Disney Wars, about the history of Disney, related to Michael Eisner when he became CEO. I mean, I would read books about CEOs and about building businesses, and then get yourself in the heads of people that make decisions with limited information, which is what executives do and what humans do.
Love it. Cool. And I'm sure you guys are putting out some stuff too, right? I mean, like, talk to us a little bit about really what you're working on, and how, first of all, how people can find out more information about you, and what are you working on these days that you want people to pay attention to, or how you can help.
So, first of all, if you want to get in touch, please do. I'm on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/the-word-in and then /Sam F. Jacobs. Revenue Collective, I'm in Austin to figure out, is there demand? I mean, I think I'm almost, I'm 99% sure across the world there's demand, because I get so many inbounds. But what we're working on is building the group and building the community and making it super, super valuable. Our NPS is 70. We've never had anyone churn in a year and a half, and it is a dues-paying organization. So, what I'm trying to do is meet people in all the different cities all over the world and the country, and figure out how where do people need help and how can we help them. The organization is specifically about how do we take executives and how do we help them and how do we help them succeed. So if you're interested, if you're out there and you've achieved a VP level title, we don't let in founders or CEOs, and we don't let in anybody that's not a VP. So it's really an exclusive community for commercial operators. And if you want to learn more, if you want to join, it's pretty cool. I think the favorite thing that we do is we have this global Slack workspace where there's 200 people from all over the world, and you see the little letters like LDN for London and AMS for Amsterdam, and you'll ask a question about how do you manage weighted probability forecasting at the enterprise level when it's 7-figure deals, and you'll get 5 answers from people all over the world in 5 seconds, which is
That's awesome.
Really fucking cool. So get in touch with me if you want. You can also email me at sam.f.jacobs@gmail, and happy to tell you more.
Awesome. And I wish I had a resource like what you're putting in those early days, because it's almost like you need a support group. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
because you think you're the only one out there. I mean, that's why the entrepreneurs, right? The why EOs and are so successful, because the entrepreneurial mindset's different, right? And your friends just don't get it. Like, my friends think I live this fucking glamorous lifestyle of flying all over the world to all these cool places. I'm like, really? You think this is glamorous?
John, it's occasionally glamorous, right? It's
occasionally, very occasionally, right? But then when I jump on a red eye and I have to then have, 10 phone calls and then stay up until 3 o'clock in the morning writing all these fucking and all that stuff, it's not as glamorous as you think it is. So having that sounding board of people who are like you, or who are going through those same things, or who have been through those same things and can give you some just advice to maybe skip a few steps. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I think we desperately need. And I love the gap that you're filling right now, because it seems like there's a big one in the marketplace for that level.
Yeah, so, I mean, if you think about it, we're salespeople, right? So we're great at getting the job because we can sell our way into it. But then what happens when you get the job and you're not supposed to ask the CEO? I mean, how do I do this? They're like, I thought I hired you to do that. So come to Revenue Collective. We'll figure it out for you.
Awesome, Sam. Well, it's been a pleasure as always. I appreciate you coming on here. And yeah, for anybody out there, if you know somebody who's a VP who's been struggling for whatever reason, or if they might have gotten let go, or they got a new job and they're trying to, holy shit, I kind of wail by the tail here. What do I do with it? You should go check out the Revenue Collective over at Sam. All right.
John, thanks so much for having me on the show. You should know that your episode of the Sales Hacker podcast is the most downloaded episode.
No shit, huh?
Yeah. So, I appreciate your support. You're doing amazing things, and thanks for having me.
No, and thank you, Sam. I think we've had a great relationship. I'm looking forward to keeping this one going. So, and everybody out there, as I usually say, go make somebody smile today. There's too much negativity and bullshit out there. So go make somebody smile, and it'll make yourself a better day. So have a great one, and let's make it happen. All right. Thanks, Sam.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Cheers.